buses. We don't record for 2 weeks and we shoot 2 in 3 days. But there's a reason why. It was a big game yesterday, and in my eyes, the season's over. Man City are the champions. So, Ois, firstly, how are you? And then you can explain whether you think that is the case that Arsenal have blown it again.
Season season will be over tomorrow, mate. That's what.
Don't
But
you don't you even go there.
we may be shooting 3 times in the week if you're not careful. Let's see now. I wish you well for tomorrow. Yeah, no. First and foremost, doing well. I'm sure we'll get into the meats and bones of the game yesterday. Quite an interesting affair. Is the season over? Let's see. Let's get into it. But yeah, I'll let you lead us in. Are you?
It perfectly encapsulated, the 3 games, Liverpool, Arsenal game, and then obviously the Man City game. It sort of almost encapsulated the way that they've been. Uh, Arsenal, very solid, very professional, as they've been virtually throughout the whole season. Liverpool, I mean, it just typifies Liverpool and Klopp. It's helter-skelter, it's chaotic, it's unpredictable, and in a sense, the 3-3 result after being 3-1 up for up until about 80 odd minutes, it summed their season up. And Man City will always find a way of winning football games. They've just got that extra bit of quality. Fair play to Spurs. I mean, we talked about how Spurs were going to be, and on another day against probably another team, they would have got something out of the game. But this Man City team knows how to win games of football. And as I said, it was just almost perfectly encapsulated, encompassed exactly what these teams are all about. So I thought it was a good performance by Spurs. That Son, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. That Son miss, and I think it was a miss. I mean, people crediting the keeper, and yes, he positioned himself very well. But a player of Son's ability, 9 times out of 10, he's got to score. So as an Arsenal fan, you must be gutted, absolutely gutted. But it's business as usual. Manchester City win a game of football, and in my eyes, they've won the league. So
Yeah.
what's your take, my friend?
Well, you mentioned the word gutted. I don't think that is the overriding emotion. Perhaps one of disappointment because it definitely feels as though the last chance. I mean, it's a first and foremost it's an away game. They could have been playing anyone away from home. You always feel away from home. There's always a half decent chance for the home team. We mentioned obviously in the run up to the game that it would be an unusual atmosphere, which it clearly proved to be the case. There were times in the first half you felt as though it was a game being played after the COVID lockdown eased, if you remember, where it was, I mean, you could hear a lot within the stadium. So, very unusual atmosphere. And I spoke about the fact that I thought if Spurs were going to get a result, it's going to be difficult just because the energy in the stadium, especially against the top team in Europe, the best team in Europe over the last 4 or 5 years, you need the crowd with you. You need something to will that ball in, so to speak. I wonder how many Spurs fans our Son was bearing down on goal actually, to your point, wanted him to score. They're probably quite relieved when Ortega made the save. I mean, look, from my perspective, gutted genuinely isn't the overriding emotion. I think I'd processed it for quite some time that I thought City would probably sneak through against Spurs simply because Spurs weren't in great form aside from that Burnley win. But to your point, you have to give Man City immense credit. Away from home, yes, they've been here, done it. All the players have played. I think Harry Neville mentioned on commentary that all these players have played every single type of game possible in terms of difference of stakes and what have you. So you don't expect them to buckle, and they kept patient. They weren't great in that first half, and Spurs had some moments. Although I thought City also had some moments. The game was fairly open. I thought very risky game plan by Spurs. Although I think in the end it was fine, given they had that extra play in midfield. But still, I mean, there were loads of spaces out there. To be fair, and City, I think for that reason, I always felt were going to score because you can't play City in terms of that open a game and expect them to not hit the back of the net at some point, and that proved to be the case. A very typical City goal, to be fair. Third man run from De Bruyne, flashed across goal, and there's the big man to tap it in. So, look, I think from a Man City perspective, you still have to give them credit. I think you've got to be careful when comparing Man City to Arsenal in the sense of I mean, feeling sorry for Arsenal as though I think on the one hand, you can be quite complimentary about Arsenal and say, look, if they do end the season with 87, 89 points, that is a huge achievement in terms of their progress. I always say they're a proper team, but equally, look, after 37, 38 games, you are where you are. And Arsenal seemingly, I say seemingly, have fallen just short. So I think in terms of feeling sorry, yes, in another era, going up against another type of team or another type of competition, maybe Arsenal would have enough. But I also think you've got to look at that two ways. If it wasn't for the incredible competition, would Arsenal, would Liverpool in recent times have been lifted to these type of standards? I question that. I'm not sure they would. So it does take somebody to set the pace, let's say, to set the standard, to kind of have these other teams kind of really pushing themselves, let's say, to get to that level. And I think Arsenal looks like again just fallen short. Yeah, look, I think from a City perspective, they deserve credit. I still think, look, let's see how the last game goes. We've seen in previous years, Ayub, it hasn't always gone to plan, or at least in the first half, it hasn't. Man City have won a couple of Premier League titles, Ayub, right at the very death, with the last knockings, famously, obviously, with the Sergio Aguero goal, but even Gundogan. I mean, that was getting quite late there. I think I'm
Yeah,
sure he
yeah,
scored around late 70s, early
yeah, yeah,
80s.
yeah,
I think it
yeah.
was, and obviously he came on, I believe, at half time alongside Zinchenko to turn that game around against Villa. So it's never easy. West Ham have taken a few pastings. I don't think Everton will be an easy pushover for Arsenal, just because perhaps Arsenal are also a bit deflated, perhaps going into the game. But I would like Arsenal to finish off professionally, try and get a home win to sign off against the fans. Hopefully, another clean sheet to keep that record going as well. But you just never know. You just truly never know. Weird things can happen. It's a game of football. I expect Man City to see this out for sure. But if you look at obviously over the last couple of years or some of their Premier League title triumphs, they have come down to a few twists and turns on the last day, even if they are playing at home. So I don't think we should just start the post-mortem just yet, although I feel like you're very keen to do so. But with one game left, I think we should just see how it pans out. And Arsenal still have to be professional and make sure and force Man City to win that game. And look, if that game's perhaps, I mean, final point, if Arsenal are winning, hopefully, I say relatively comfortably, I'd probably prefer to have the West Ham at home game than maybe perhaps the West Ham Everton at home game. I'm not so sure. Um, but I do feel as though it could be one of those situations where Arsenal perhaps look relatively comfortable, perhaps, and City are maybe winning 1-0 going into the 75th, 76th minute. Who knows? You don't know how these things are going to pan out. So let's see how Sunday plays out. For now, City are for sure in the driving seat. They would have taken this at the start of the season, a home game against West Ham to win a fourth Premier League title in a row. But I'm not hugely disappointed, let's say, from an Arsenal perspective, because I do feel as though a huge amount of progress has been made this season, and that shouldn't get lost in amongst all of this.
There's optimism, but there's delusion as well. I mean, if you think that the season isn't over, I mean, you're off your rocker,
Well,
my friend.
they are playing games this Sunday. I've
They
checked.
are playing games, but you have to look at history. You look at how you have to look at this Manchester City side. I mean, it's you talked about two games. I mean, obviously the Aguero. I mean, it's iconic commentary, iconic game, and the game against Aston Villa as well. But that in a sense that sort of reaffirms my belief that it's a foregone conclusion that this Manchester City side knows how to win games of football, key games of football, important games of football, which is really something that defines champions. It's what's between the ears, and really perhaps that's the reason why Arsenal are not the champions of the English Premier League, because when it mattered, when the pressure, when the stakes were so high, I wouldn't sort of say they crumbled, they folded, but they were found wanting. Man
When
City are never found
when,
wanting.
when were they
Aston
found
Villa,
once?
Aston
But
Villa.
it's
I mean,
over the course of 38 games. I mean, there's a good chance there'll be 2 points that separated them. I'm not sure that's a chasm to kind of base any strong narratives on to say this is where they fell short and this is where they fell short. I think only one team can win, right?
but when you're competing at the very highest level, it will be the odd game here and there that will define the season. And that's why I sort of say, I mean, you're absolutely right. Over 37 to 38 games, it's a large enough sample size to sort of say we are the best side. But when you're at that level, it will be just one or two games that will define the season. And really, and when we talked about it briefly on the last show, I still, as an Arsenal, if I was an Arsenal fan, I would be disappointed. I would be annoyed and frustrated as well because you if you it's hard enough uh trying to sort of stay level with Manchester City, but if you actually are the front runner for a period of time, it's really and the team is good enough. That's where the frustration would be. We're not talking about a team that perhaps would be all right, how we're first. by good fortune. No, you were first because you're a damn good side. In fact, in my opinion, the best overall complete football side. And that's where the frustration is, because that's 2 seasons without a trophy. 2 seasons where, I mean, last season, obviously, you were the front runners. You had quite a sizable gap that was clawed back. And again, it's what's between the ears, because it wasn't based on ability. It was just based on maybe
Yeah, but
the expectation, the pressure.
I disagree strongly.
Well, you will
Strongly disagree.
disagree.
I strongly disagree
You
because
are.
I mean, look, ultimately, I mean, I don't think Arsenal have fallen short because they've actually improved on last year. I mean, it's obvious. I don't think anyone could suggest that Arsenal haven't improved. I don't want to make this too much about Arsenal. I mean, I think Man City should get their fair share of commentary as well. But what I'm trying to suggest is one team was always going to win it, and it looks like Man City, and again, that's why I emphasize. I hope Arsenal win their last game of football. I'd like that gap for what you might say doesn't really matter, but no, I would like that gap to be 2 points at the most, because I think that is something to be said. That okay, it's only a couple of points. I think last year they finished 5 points shy. I think it could have been more actually. City when they kind of relaxed heading into the some of the final games, but I would like Arsenal to force Man City to win their last game because I think stuff like that matters. You say they'll be left 2 seasons without a trophy. Uh, Look, ultimately, if I had to sign up right now for this next year, I'd sign up for it because this is what it's all about: the big games down the stretch, being relevant. I think that's what you heard from Ange. I think after the game as well. I think that's what he was leaning towards when he was talking about finding out about some of the fragility, let's say, in terms of um, kind of the very essence of what Spurs is inside and outside of the club. I think he kind of hinted at that strongly in his post-match comments. And look, ultimately, Arsenal, where they've got to after a season where, if you remember, Spurs dumped them out of Champions League spots a couple of years ago, and it looked a bit doom and gloom. A lot of talk about Arteta, but they've supported him, they've backed him, uh, and he's put two title tilts back to back together. Last year they were leading for quite some times, came up short at the end. Fair enough, no issues. This year they've gone again, blow for blow. Stood the test of time, I would say. I mean, they've lost one game, it seems, in the Premier League this year. I mean, it's you're allowed in normal circumstances to lose games of football and think that hopefully if they get to 89 points, I still say if, for that to be enough. We know we're not living in normal times. This is an incredible outfit that they're going up against. I just think our narrative should be fair-minded to understand that this is a Man City team that, in my opinion, although it's perhaps not fair to say, would have won every Premier League probably in the last God knows how many years, if it wasn't for some of these challenges put forth by a Liverpool, by an Arsenal. That's not to say other teams in bygone times wouldn't have raised their standard. That's my point. But I don't think second, because Arsenal obviously are guaranteed to finish second, I believe. I don't think it's seen to be they've fallen short. I think it's more a case of, look, ultimately one team had to win it, and they've come up shy just a couple of points, but I mean 89 points is 89 points if they get that. That's a strong total. So and they would have signed up for 89 points at the start of the season. So yeah, I don't want to be too critical. That's what I would say.
I mean, that's your position. I mean, I don't know whether you've been on any of the Arsenal forums, but what are other fans saying? Because you're always quite measured. I mean, I mean, I've known you for a long time, so you're always measured. But I'd like to know exactly what the general feedback is, because really, I mean, I've got to be honest. It's when you have a side of the caliber of Arsenal, uh, and the position that you were in. This is the thing. It's the context as well, because you at the start of the season you could probably sort of say, well, look, if we finish 2 points behind Manchester City, that probably will be a good season. But really, again, you've got to look at last season, how you performed, how you played. Uh, you're a much better side. I mean, you were a good side last season. You're a much better side. You've obviously invested over 100 million in Declan Rice. So, it certainly the club, were they satisfied with second place last season? Yes, I think they probably would have been, even though they would think, we missed an opportunity. But certainly the investment that's been made, they were looking for perhaps a slight improvement. A slight improvement means first place.
Yeah, but they weren't the only ones spending money, were they, last season? I mean, they knew that City were going to strengthen. They knew that other teams were going to strengthen. I come back to this spending thing. You got to be careful about somehow. I'm not saying you are, but using it as a stick to beat teams with. What I mean is this idea that automatically spending £100 million on Declan Rice means, oh well, they better win the title next year. But yeah, but City also spent money, big money. I mean, they bought Guardiola who contributed massively down the stretch. You saw Doku yesterday winning a penalty. My
Mm.
point is that they weren't the only ones, A, spending money. B, Man City were always going to be seen. I think they started favourites for the Premier League title at the start
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
season. Man
and
City
rightly
did,
so. Rightly
rightly
so.
so. So in terms of like positions, I think it's the bookies. It played out just as you thought, and I think Arsenal pushed them perhaps closer than maybe many thought. Gary Neville obviously thought Arsenal were going to win. If you remember, my preseason pick at the start was that Arsenal would just edge it, although I did come off it
Mm.
early doors when they were looking
Yeah.
a bit shaky. I just think we sometimes look at Arsenal, the fact that, oh, they did lead at some point. I mean, let's not forget Liverpool actually led for the majority.
Mm.
But you forget that Man City, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't quite check the statistics, but they've lost one game in about 40
Yeah,
in
yeah,
all
yeah.
competitions. Their last league defeat was in December. They've gone 20 unbeaten or something. So that's what they came up against. Now, you might say, well, Arsenal could have influenced that. They did. They took 4 points off them this year. So I'm not sure what Arsenal could have done by not losing to Man City, by not losing to Liverpool. Yes, they had Villa do the double over them, but they didn't lose to United. They didn't lose to Chelsea. I'm just saying that Arsenal did what they could. If you said to Arsenal next year you're going to finish with 89 points, they'd say yes. If you told them the year after you're going to finish with 89 points, they say sign me up. That's my point. Like, you can only keep growing and keep fighting. And again, I don't think that they will have another season in the next couple of years where they don't lose to Man City. They probably will. This was probably,
Mm.
to be fair to you, in terms of the against the big teams, their biggest hope. You're right. Some of those defeats will loom large for sure. I mean, losing at home to West Ham and then 4 weeks later smacking them 6-0 at their ground just tells you that they had a bit of a wobble in the middle. They had a couple of wobbles this year, Arsenal. So maybe that is the highest standard. And look, I'm okay with that because in football, you accept that you're just not going to go a season unscathed. There's going to be peaks, there's going to be troughs. You just hope that you can maximize those runs. And for the best part, Arsenal have. So let's see. Final games to be played yet. Man City very much in the driving seat. Just on the game itself, what do you think of the game? I'm sure you watched it. It was an unusual atmosphere. Do you have any? You saw some of Postecoglou's comments after. What was your general overview? Also, large picture about some of his comments about Spurs and some of the sort of Spurs fans' sentiments. Let's say.
I mean, in terms of the game, I was pleasantly surprised by Spurs. I mean, I really was expecting. I wasn't expecting that they were just going to lay down and die and just sort of concede goals for fun. So I certainly was impressed by the attitude, and really on any other day they would have got something out of the game. I mean, when Edison went off, but thankfully this is again Man City. They've got a more than able deputy who came up trumps. But the Son moment, that to me was the defining moment because he's a he's he's one player that if you put in that position, you'd sort of think 9 times out of 10, probably even sort of 99 times out of 100, he'd score. Maybe perhaps not as high as that, but certainly that was for me the moment, the moment of the game. You can never write off, even if it had scored, you can't write off City would have scored a winner, but that was a defining moment. So it was a good game in the sense that it was more than what I predicted. A lot of people were predicting it was going to be a walk in the park for City, so it certainly wasn't. At halftime, 0-0. It was there was certainly I think with City fans there must have been tension in the air because they knew that they had to get the win. A draw was not going to be good enough. So a good game. Spurs gave a really decent account. And the record for Man City at Spurs is quite poor, quite ordinary, quite average. So there was a lot of factors against Man City in the respect in terms of the history, but good performance by City in the sense that they found a way to win a game of football. Their quality always tells in the end. They've got players that when it matters, they'll come at trumps, and they did. KDB, Haaland, and after that first goal and the second goal as well, the penalty, clinical from the big man. So decent game of football, enjoyable in the sense that because there was something riding on it, and the fact that Spurs sort of gave a good account of themselves. They were there to play a game of football against Man City, but Man City do what Man City always do. They win games of football.
They win games of football, absolutely. Just on obviously what Postecoglou touched on, I think if we take some of the emotion out of, I mean, he was obviously quite upset, quite irritated, quite angry,
Yeah, yeah.
and he has been in recent weeks, hasn't he? He's been a little bit, yeah, a bit not, I wouldn't say flustered, but just a bit cranky, I would say. They've not obviously been in great form. Look, before the game, when he was questioned about by reporters regarding the proportion of Spurs fans that would want Spurs to lose, he took slight umbrage with that line of questioning, although he did it in fairly good humour, I thought, before the game. He did speak yesterday about perhaps um, miscalculating, in a sense, the sentiment towards obviously not wanting Arsenal to win the Premier League title. I mean, I'm going to be very open and honest. I don't really mind so much about the fans. I mean, that is what it is. There's no real need to discuss that too much. What I would say though is that Postecoglou, if I was a Spurs fan, although perhaps the way he articulated it after the game, if I was a Spurs fan, I'd really think long and hard about what he's saying, because I do understand what he's trying to get at for sure, and I thought he's articulated it well now on a few points, on a few occasions where he's talking about, look, he just doesn't really have too much time for this rivalry and what have you, and looking sideways. And if you remember at the start of the season, I spoke about it about Spurs, and I said, look, I'm an Arsenal supporter up north. I don't have any issues with Spurs. I'll judge them as I see fit, and if I see that they're playing some good stuff, I have no issues calling that out. I just think he's articulated it in the right way. And if I was a Spurs fan, I'd be quite hopeful that they could back this manager to get them to where he wants to get to. He's not talking about taking celebrations because they're going to finish above Arsenal, or do it, or getting one over on them, or what have you. He's talking about our own individual journey to get us to where we want to get to. You ask every single Spurs fan if they'd want to swap places with Arsenal. Of course they would, 100%.
Mm.
Arsenal are playing the very big games now 2 years in a row. Yes, they've fallen short. But the question is, would you rather be part of the competition and fail than not, or compared to like not being part of the competition at all? And that's where Spurs are right now. They're irrelevant in the grand
Mm.
scheme of things. They're
Yeah, yeah.
relevant, and Arsenal haven't been. So I just think that what he's talking about is, if we want to get to where we want to get to as Spurs in terms of having lofty ambitions and what have you, we've got to stop looking sideways, and we've got to build our own culture and identity where we're not compared or thinking about the misery of others, or perhaps getting one over on others, and simply thinking about how can we get Spurs being part of the title race. And for as long as you've known me, we've always discussed what is the single most important thing a big club should be doing. And I always say the same thing every single year, which is they don't have a divine right to win, but they must be challenging. And if you're not challenging, then you're failing ultimately. You're not playing the big games, the most important games. And Arsenal now, for the first time in over a decade plus, they've started to play some games that really matter down the stretch. Whereas before, you'd start the season with not very much hope, but then before you know it, October, November, you've had it beaten out. You're dwindling around in eighth or ninth, and you make a little run and you finish fifth, and you're like, well, it's Arsenal Football Club. You should be about a bit more than that. So that's why I think Mikel Arteta deserves a huge amount of credit. And just to finish off with you, my overriding genuine emotion, if Arsenal fall short this year, is that I really hope this manager stays for as long as possible, because I really think he's driven. I think he's smart. I think he's getting the best out of these players. I think he's taken them to the levels that they have. They've spent good money, don't get me wrong, but we've seen other clubs spend a lot of money and they don't look anywhere near as cohesive as Arsenal do. You can see there's a lot of work being done on training ground. It's a young squad. It's a likable squad, I would argue. There's some good football being played. There's some good characters in there. I'm thinking about like an Odegaard. Generally, neutral
Mm.
fans do like what he's about. Saka, even others, I would say. Even I even think the Havertz story is a feel good story, because he doesn't get in the headlines for any wrong reasons or anything like that. He's just somebody who's up there trying hard, and he's come up trumps near the end of the season as well. So I think, look, if they do fall short, I don't think there should be any huge inquests as to why. I think they've actually improved, but also City have gone again as well. So City, if they win, they'll have finished with 91 points, and they only finished with 89 last year. So anyway, from a Spurs perspective, just going back, I'd be hopeful that they really get behind this manager, because other than the fact that there's been a huge mood shift with him over the start of the season when things were going really well,
Mm.
to now where it just looks a little bit, and perhaps the season end has come at the right time for him. I just think he's somebody you want to get behind, because he's keeping the larger picture in mind about where he wants to take Spurs. So I'm hopeful he gets an opportunity, because there is something there. There's something there to work on for sure.
On the Spurs point, I think this is the problem sometimes, isn't it? We live in a world where it has to be sort of immediate gratification. Time is something which not afforded to many coaches, especially at the highest level, even at lower levels these days. because he started the season so brightly. It was almost, I suppose, I mean, that therein lies the problem because you set your stall out. Everybody had higher expectations, and then it's tailed off, and that always worries me because you 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 expect the curve to be going up. Uh, this is obviously it's peaked quite early, and then obviously it seems to have been going down. So that's where the worry is because you're always thinking, well, hang on, what's going on? I mean, is he has he sort of peaked too early? I mean, his ideas were great at the start because they were playing lovely football, getting great results. The Spurs fans that I know were really optimistic, really excited. But I'm sort of sensing now a little bit of uncertainty. I don't think they're disillusioned with the coach, but certainly there's an apprehension because they're thinking, well, when we're not sure exactly how it's sort of well, we're obviously aware of how it's finished. It's not finished the way we wanted to. So I don't know what's going to happen. What is next season going to be better, or is he going to pick up where he's left off, which is not great?
Yeah, fair. I mean, look, to be fair, if you remember the start of the season, even when they were flying high, I said they'd perhaps finish sixth, but then I had United also just sneaking fourth, so I was wrong on a few counts there. I don't think they had enough. They started really well, and sometimes this squad also gets found out over the course of the season, right? They've had a few injuries, and they've not looked anywhere near as sprightly, shall we say, as they did at the start when they were uh, obviously kind of quite an energetic team, quite a fast team, quite a vibrant team, and what have you. So, look, I think from a Spurs perspective, I still would be surprised if they were able to challenge next year, let's say. Whereas with City and hopefully with Arsenal, you definitely expect those two to be right at the very top, depending on who leaves and who goes. But again, just coming back to the title race, obviously you see it as a done deal. I mean, most do. I do to some extent. Let's not. I'm not stupid. Um, but but I still sometimes think you've got to let these games play out. Like I said, I'm more interested to see if Arsenal can lift themselves because they will have seen yesterday as the last opportunity. It's weird how the human mind works. You feel like if Spurs did get a result, then Arsenal would be lifted and maybe win relatively comfortably on Sunday. Although it's never comfortable when you're going for your kind of first Premier League title
Mm.
in over 2 decades. Now you kind of feel like City will win, and Arsenal might actually just have a bit of a draw or something like this because you have the kind of there's a certain sense of deflation, right? After what happened yesterday, and yeah, time did stand still when Son went through. It was weird. I didn't for one moment, for some reason, think it's scored, but maybe that's just because you have a glass half empty. You're thinking it's not going to
Mm.
happen, but it was a great opportunity. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. As opportunities go, to run half the length of the pitch pretty much and have a clear sight of goal. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe a little bit of, I won't say fatigue, but it was late in the game. They'd also had a little bit of the run around by City at certain points. He was playing on the wing. So maybe he wasn't as calm and as composed as perhaps he would be if that chance had happened, let's say in the 5th minute or in the 28th minute or something like this. You still expect him perhaps near post just to slot it in, give the goalkeeper some credit. But yeah, some of the you asked me a question earlier, just very quickly about some of the other Arsenal. I've read a few articles, and they're generally quite measured, like quite understanding of not necessarily Arsenal falling short. Again, I don't think there's too much vitriol towards Spurs. I mean, look, the players were fine. They acquitted themselves fine. I always thought the fans would be like that, but I don't have too much criticism of that as well, to be honest. It is what it is, football. But yeah, I think Arsenal is a clear understanding of what this club once was in terms of over the last 10, 15 years. And I swear, when you hold it through that lens and you're a big club that's been through the doldrums, you're very grateful, let's say, to be up there fighting, challenging, and you don't have a divine right to win these things. You have to earn it, and it seems like over 38 games they've not quite earned it, and you have to be comfortable with that. You have to make peace with that, and then go again next season and do better. And if you remember last year, I did say like they'll come again, and they did come again. It looks like they've just fallen short. So hopefully they can do the business next year.
This is where the difference between me and you is quite extreme because you talked about the points and you were quite uh, sort of keen on emphasizing the points, the points. I mean, we finished Leeds United. You always knew that I was going to slide Leeds somehow. We finished on 90 points. Now, normally 90 points in the championship and you're automatically promoted. 90 points finishing third means nothing to me. That 90 points mean it could have been 150 points.
Yeah, but
If we finish third, it means nothing because the way that I saw Leeds as the second best side in that league. So therefore, my expectation was to finish second. We didn't. To me, it's a miserable failure of a season. Now we might. I'm doubtful that we will. I've got a feeling, a real horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach that it's going to go all tits up
Careful,
tomorrow.
careful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that just about
belly
is
up,
allowed.
belly up, belly up was the phrase.
Yeah. So I am really, really concerned. But that's the way that I look at it. Because in sports, it's not just, all right, you had a good season. Now, to me, it's that expectation, right? Are you the second best team in the league? Yes, you are the second best team in the league. So therefore, expect to finish second. Arsenal, I would say, that overall, and I've said it sort of before,
Yeah.
I've said it today. I actually view Arsenal as the best football side in that league. So therefore, my expectation would be to finish first, and that's where sort of me and you differ. You're thinking, yeah, it's a solid season. We were thereabouts. We competed, we challenged. I don't view it through that lens. My lens is through, right, how good are you? You're the second best. So therefore, show me that you're the second best.
Yeah, but I don't agree that they are a better outfit than Man City. You proved that over 38 games. Let's see them and let's see what Sunday brings. And maybe they end up being a point better than them or goal difference better than them. I don't know. Let's see. But the fact of the matter is that I don't think they can control Man City. Like I said, they beat them. They took 4 points off them. Now you might say, well,
Yeah.
that you've messed up elsewhere. Fine, but you are allowed to lose games. I mean, it's very rare that a team goes unbeaten as Arsenal once did. But I just think it's not so much. I'm not suggesting that Arsenal should be happy because, to your point, once you get to those standards, you want to make sure that you finish it off with the most important trophy, which is the Premier League.
Mm.
But I'm just looking at it through the lens of it wasn't always like this. They've not challenged for a Premier League title for over God knows over a couple of well, say 2 decades. They did challenge once or twice in there. But to go up against this team, it's a bit of an honor and a privilege because you're thinking this team's an incredible team to go up against. And Arsenal couldn't even sniff those standards over the
Mm.
last decade whilst Man City were running roughshod. Liverpool were living with them for a good little while and beat them the one time. I just think Arsenal shouldn't lose hope. And I do think that not all trophies and not all triumphs are measured equally. I do believe in that. I think some are. And I think if Arsenal do manage in the next couple of years to overcome this type of Man City led by an incredible manager, I think it measures differently, it hits differently, rather than simply just winning a trophy or winning a Premier League title without as much competition as there is now. So I do think when you're coming up short, there's a different lens to which you should look at it. And I think equally, if you somehow, like Liverpool did at least on one occasion in the Premier League and fell just incredibly short on two others, I do think that has to be measured through its proper lens. So that's why I look at it, and I hope they can finish off with 89 points because I think it's an incredible points total to put forth, even though they may well fall short.
There you go on that points total again. Right. That's our
But
thoughts.
third in the championship is a different dynamic because you end up in the playoffs. So you know that all too well. There are no playoffs. There are no kind of further games to play. If you finish second, 2 points behind arguably the best team in Europe, there's somewhat to be said about that because some other teams are going to finish off with a negative goal difference, but we don't need to go there, do we?
Right. Well, let's on that note, let's end the show. But what really I would like on this one is your opinion. Uh, I'd love the opinions of the viewers on this subject that have Arsenal. I mean, OS is obviously eloquently uh, expressed that it's been a really good season. What's your thoughts? I mean, for Liverpool fans, Arsenal fans, if there's any out there, apart from a handful in the northwest. But oh, give us your thoughts because I'm obviously of the opinion that success ultimately is based on winning things. This is 2 seasons that Arsenal have not won anything, and they have an excellent side. So we'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Do you agree with us? Do you agree with me? Have you got your own opinions? So please share them amongst smashing and like doing all the good stuff. All right. So it's been a impromptu one, but it was important because obviously all three teams have played over the last few days. And in my mind, Manchester City have won the league. So congratulations to Man City and all Man City fans. Commiserations to
Congratulations.
to the Arsenal fans.
Congratulations to Norwich City in advance.
And it will be, and I will be bitterly disappointed, annoyed, angry, infuriated, because my expectations of Leeds United Football Club was to finish second. The points mean nothing to me, which some fans actually are going on about. We've got 90 points. Doesn't mean a thing. We'll be in the championship next season.
I'll be pulling for you tomorrow. Don't worry.
But and to those fans, please, those of a Islamic disposition, the prayer mats, get them out, get them out. we need divine intervention. All right then, folks. As always, it's a pleasure always to have you on the show.
Likewise,
I think next time when we record, we may record before you go away, but if we don't, obviously have a safe journey back home. To the viewers, Oasis is flying back on Saturday.
Correct,
so we've been graced by his presence. I saw him yesterday, so it was wonderful to see OS in the flesh. But he'll be flying out.
Likewise.
So hopefully we'll catch up very, very soon. So the viewers, take care, enjoy yourselves. We'll see you soon. OS, take care. I'll speak to you soon. Ta-ta for now.